What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actresses walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a pleasant chat and instead finds herself ambushed by a host with an axe to grind? In just 30 seconds, a simple question about acting choices turned into the most jaw-dropping meltdown in Loose Women history. And it only took one unbelievably offensive comment from Denise Welch to send the entire panel into absolute chaos. Brenda Blethyn settled into her seat on the iconic Loose Women set, smiling warmly at the studio audience. The veteran actress, known for her down-to-earth charm and incredible range on screen, had been invited to discuss her latest project. Beside her sat the usual panel: Denise Welch, Kay Adams, Nadia Sawalha, and Jane Moore. The atmosphere seemed friendly enough, the kind of casual daytime television environment where celebrities typically share lighthearted anecdotes and promote their work. Denise Welch, sitting directly across from Brenda, kicked things off with what appeared to be an innocent question. "So Brenda, lovely to have you here. I've been watching your career for years, and I have to ask, do you ever feel like you've been typecast? You know, always playing the same sort of ordinary woman roles?" The other panelists shifted slightly in their seats. Kay Adams glanced sideways at Denise, her eyebrows raising just a fraction. Brenda, ever gracious, smiled and responded thoughtfully. "Well, I wouldn't say typecast exactly. I think I've been fortunate to play a variety of characters, each with their own depth and complexity. Whether they're so-called ordinary women or not, they're all human beings with rich inner lives." Denise leaned forward, her expression shifting to something more pointed. "But surely you must feel frustrated sometimes? I mean, you're not exactly getting the glamorous roles, are you? No Bond girls, no romantic leads opposite Hollywood heartthrobs. Just, the frumpy detective or the working-class mum." The studio audience went quiet. Nadia Sawalha's mouth fell open slightly, and Jane Moore looked down at her notes, clearly uncomfortable. Brenda's smile remained fixed, but something changed in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Frumpy. I think the characters I play have tremendous value. They represent real women, women who deserve to have their stories told." Denise waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away Brenda's words like irritating flies. "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You're a wonderful actress, but let's be honest about the roles you get. They're hardly aspirational, are they? I mean, when was the last time you wore a designer gown on screen instead of a cardigan from Marks & Spencer?" Kay Adams attempted to intervene, her voice careful and measured. "Denise, I think what Brenda is trying to say is that there's value in representing everyday people on screen. Not every role needs to be glamorous to be important." But Denise wasn't finished. She turned back to Brenda with a look that can only be described as condescending. "And another thing, I've heard from people in the industry that you're quite difficult to work with, that you have very specific demands on set. Is that true? Do you think maybe that's why you're not getting offered better roles?" The air in the studio became electric. Jane Moore finally spoke up, her voice sharp. "Denise, that's completely out of line. You can't just throw around accusations like that without any basis." Brenda sat up straighter, her composure beginning to crack. "I'm sorry. What exactly are you implying? That I'm difficult because I care about my craft? Because I want to ensure that the characters I play are portrayed authentically?" Denise shrugged with exaggerated nonchalance. "I'm not implying anything. I'm just asking questions. Isn't that what we do on this show? Have honest conversations? Or are we supposed to just sit here and blow smoke up everyone's backside?" Nadia Sawalha jumped in, her voice rising with indignation. "There's a difference between honest conversation and being needlessly rude, Denise. Brenda is our guest, and you're treating her like she's on trial for something." The camera caught Brenda's hands gripping the armrests of her chair, her knuckles whitening. She took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain her professional demeanor. "I came here today to talk about my work, about a project I'm passionate about. I didn't come here to be insulted or to defend my entire career against baseless accusations. Denise laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the studio. Oh, here we go. The victim card. Classic. You know what your problem is, Brenda? You can't handle a bit of real talk. You're so used to everyone praising you and telling you how marvelous you are that you can't cope when someone actually challenges you. Kay Adams stood up slightly from her seat, her hand reaching toward Denise as if to physically stop her. Denise, enough. This is completely inappropriate. We need to move on. But Denise was on a roll now, her voice growing louder and more aggressive. No, I don't think we should move on. I think we should talk about this. About how certain actresses get away with mediocrity because they're considered national treasures. About how the British acting establishment protects its own, even when they're not bringing anything new or exciting to the table. The studio audience began to murmur, a low rumble of disapproval spreading through the crowd. Jane Moore slammed her hand on the desk, the sound reverberating through the studio. That is absolutely outrageous, Denise. Brenda Blethyn has won BAFTAs, been nominated for Oscars, and has given some of the most memorable performances in British cinema. Who do you think you are to sit there and call her mediocre? Brenda's voice, when she finally spoke again, was quiet, but trembling with restrained anger. I have dedicated my life to this profession. I have worked on stages, in tiny independent films, in major productions. I have poured my heart and soul into every single role. And I have done it with integrity and respect for my fellow actors and crew members. For you to sit there and reduce all of that to nothing more than mediocrity, protected by some imaginary establishment, is not just insulting to me. It's insulting to every actor who works hard at their craft. Denise rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, please, spare me the sanctimonious speech. You know what I think? I think you're bitter. Bitter that you never made it to the A-list. Bitter that you're always the supporting player, never the star. And instead of admitting that maybe, just maybe, you don't have that star quality, you hide behind this whole "I represent real women" nonsense. The entire panel erupted. Nadia Sawalha was shouting, "This is disgraceful! Absolutely disgraceful!" Kay Adams was trying to get the attention of the producers off camera, waving her arms frantically. Jane Moore was pointing her finger at Denise, her face red with anger. You need to apologize right now, Denise. This has gone way too far. Brenda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sudden movement silenced everyone. She removed her microphone with shaking hands, carefully placing it on the desk in front of her. Her voice, when she spoke, was crystal clear and filled with a dignity that made Denise's attacks seem even more pathetic by comparison. I will not sit here and be spoken to like this. I have never, in all my years in this industry, encountered such unprofessional, mean-spirited behavior. You invited me here as a guest, and instead of conducting a respectful interview, you've used this platform to launch a series of personal attacks. I don't know what your motivations are, whether you're trying to create drama for ratings or whether this reflects some personal issue you have with me or my career, but I will not participate in it. Denise leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Oh, so now you're running away. How very brave. Kay Adams stood up fully now, moving toward Brenda. Brenda, please, you don't have to leave. Denise is completely out of order, and we all know it. Please stay. We can continue this conversation properly. But Brenda shook her head, her expression sad but resolute. I appreciate that, Kay, truly. But I think it's best if I go. This isn't the kind of environment where any productive conversation can happen. Nadia Sawalha reached out to touch Brenda's arm gently. I am so sorry, Brenda. This is not what this show is supposed to be about. You deserve so much better than this. Jane Moore stood as well, positioning herself between Brenda and Denise. Brenda has conducted herself with absolute grace and professionalism throughout this entire ordeal, which is more than can be said for some people at this table. Denise scoffed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh yes, everyone rally around poor Brenda. God forbid anyone ask her a tough question. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The establishment protecting its own. Brenda turned to face Denise one final time, her gaze steady and unflinching. You call these tough questions? Insulting someone's appearance, their career choices, their character? That's not journalism, Denise. That's bullying, and the fact that you can't see the difference is truly sad. The words hung in the air like a slap. Even Denise seemed momentarily taken aback, her smirk faltering for just a second before she recovered. Well, if you can't handle the heat, then yes, perhaps you should leave. Brenda didn't respond. She simply turned and walked toward the edge of the set. The cameras followed her every step, capturing the straight line of her back, the held high head, and the quiet dignity in her exit. The studio audience began to applaud, a smattering at first, then growing louder and louder until it became a thunderous ovation. Kay Adams called after her, "Brenda, wait!" But Brenda kept walking, disappearing into the wings as the applause continued to roll through the studio. Back at the desk, chaos reigned. Nadia Sawalha turned on Denise with fury blazing in her eyes. What on earth were you thinking? That was one of the most respected actresses in Britain, and you just drove her off the set with your nasty uncalled-for comments. Denise threw her hands up defensively. I was just doing my job. I was asking probing questions. That's what we're supposed to do. Jane Moore's laugh was bitter and sharp. Probing questions? You called her frumpy, mediocre, and bitter. You accused her of being difficult with absolutely no evidence. That wasn't probing. That was a character assassination. Kay Adams was frantically speaking to someone through her earpiece, presumably a producer. Yes, she's left the building. No, I don't think she's coming back. Can you blame her? Denise stood up now too, her face flushed with anger and perhaps a hint of embarrassment. You're all overreacting. If she can't handle a bit of criticism, then maybe she is too sensitive for this industry. Nadia pointed toward the wings where Brenda had disappeared. Or that wasn't criticism. Criticism is thoughtful and constructive. What you did was cruel and spiteful. And for what? What did you possibly gain from treating a guest that way? The audience's applause had finally died down, replaced by a murmur of conversation. The energy in the room completely shifted from what it had been at the start of the show. The producers were clearly scrambling, trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of the broadcast. Jane Moore addressed the camera directly, censure, her voice professional but tight with controlled anger. I think we need to take a break. When we come back, we'll be discussing, well, we'll figure out what we're discussing. As the cameras cut away for the commercial break, the full weight of what had just happened seemed to settle over the remaining panelists. Kay Adams removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes wearily. That was a disaster, an absolute disaster. Nadia was pacing behind the desk, her hands gesturing wildly. I cannot believe that just happened. I cannot believe you thought any of that was acceptable, Denise. Denise, for the first time, seemed less certain of herself. She was being so precious about everything, acting like she's above being questioned. Jane Moore's voice cut through like ice. She answered your first question perfectly reasonably. It was you who kept pushing and pushing, getting more and more offensive with each comment. You weren't trying to have a conversation. You were trying to humiliate her. A production assistant approached the desk nervously. Ladies, we need to figure out what we're doing for the rest of the show. We've lost our main guest, and we still have 20 minutes to fill. Kay Adams looked at Denise with an expression of pure disappointment. We'll figure something out. We always do. But Denise, what you did today, that's going to have consequences. You realize that, don't you? Denise's bravado was crumbling now, saw her voice becoming defensive and slightly panicked. I was just trying to make good television. Everyone's always complaining that daytime TV is too soft, too safe. I was trying to shake things up. Nadia stopped pacing and turned to face Denise fully. There's a difference between challenging your guests and attacking them. What you did crossed every line of professional decency. Brenda Blethyn came here in good faith, expecting a normal interview, and you ambushed her with personal insults disguised as questions. The makeup artist who had been waiting in the wings came over to touch up their appearances before they went back on air. The woman's face was tight with disapproval as she worked on Denise's makeup. Even the crew seemed to be on Brenda's side, their usual friendly chatter noticeably absent. Jane Moore checked her notes, trying to pull together some semblance of a plan for the remaining segment. We could open up the discussion to the audience. Talk about professionalism in interviews, maybe. Though I'm not sure we want to highlight what just happened any more than we already have. Kay nodded slowly. We'll have to address it somehow. We can't just pretend it didn't happen. The whole thing was broadcast live. Denise sat back down heavily in her chair. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Maybe I did go too far, but she didn't have to leave. She could have defended herself, fought back. Nadia's voice was ice cold. She did defend herself, Denise, with grace and dignity, which is clearly something you know nothing about. And she left because no one should have to sit there and be verbally abused on national television, guest or not. The floor manager started counting down. We're back in 30 seconds, ladies. Please take your positions. The four women settled back into their seats. Though the atmosphere was nothing like the friendly camaraderie that usually characterized the show, Kay Adams straightened her papers while Jane Moore took a sip of water. Nadia sat with her arms crossed, her body language clearly communicating her anger. Denise stared at the desk in front of her, her usual animated energy completely deflated. As the cameras came back on, Kay addressed the audience with as much professionalism as she could muster. Welcome back to Loose Women. As you all saw before the break, our guest, Brenda Blethyn, has left the show. I think it's important that we address what happened here today. Nadia jumped in immediately. What happened was completely unacceptable. A respected actress came on the show expecting a professional interview, and instead she was subjected to a series of personal attacks. Denise opened her mouth to respond, but Jane Moore cut her off. I want to be very clear. The questions asked were not appropriate. They were not professional, and they do not reflect the values of this show or the respect we have for our guests. The camera caught Denise's face, a mixture of defiance and shame playing across her features. She finally spoke, her voice lacking its earlier certainty. I stand by my questions. I think they were valid. Kay Adams turned to her sharply. Valid? You called a BAFTA-winning actress frumpy and mediocre. You accused her of being difficult without any evidence. How is any of that valid? The studio audience murmured their agreement, a few people calling out their support for Brenda. Denise looked out at the crowd, seeming to realize for the first time that public opinion was not on her side. Nadia leaned forward, her voice passionate. Brenda Blethyn has given us some of the most incredible performances in British cinema. She brings depth, humanity, and truth to every role she plays. The idea that she should be criticized for choosing to portray real, relatable women instead of pursuing glamorous roles is absurd. Jane Moore nodded emphatically. And the suggestion that there's something wrong with representing ordinary women on screen, that those roles are somehow lesser than, that's incredibly insulting to the millions of women who see themselves reflected in those characters. Denise tried again to defend herself, her voice rising. I wasn't saying there's anything wrong with it. I was just asking if she ever felt limited by it. Kay Adams cut her off with a sharp gesture. No, you weren't. You were making judgments and passing them off as questions. There's a massive difference. The remaining segment limped along, with the three other panelists attempting to steer the conversation towards something productive, while Denise sat mostly silent, occasionally trying to justify her behavior, only to be shut down by her colleagues. The chemistry that usually made Loose Women work was completely shattered. As the show finally drew to a close, Kay Adams addressed the camera one last time. We want to thank you all for watching today. even though it's been a rather difficult show. And we want to extend our sincere apologies to Brenda Blethyn for what happened here today. Nadia added, Brenda, if you're watching, oh, please know that we have nothing but the utmost respect for you and your incredible body of work. Jane Moore finished, and we hope that this serves as a reminder that all guests deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of the format or the questions being asked. Denise remained silent, staring straight ahead as the credits began to roll. The lights in the studio came up fully as the broadcast ended. The audience filed out, their conversations animated and shocked. The remaining panelists removed their microphones, the silence between them heavy and uncomfortable. Kay Adams was the first to speak once they were off air. I need to go call the producers. This is going to be a nightmare to deal with. Nadia stood up, gathering her things quickly. I'm going to try to reach Brenda, see if I can apologize personally for what happened. Jane Moore looked at Denise, who was still sitting at the desk, her face pale. I hope you understand the gravity of what you did today, Denise. This isn't just about bad television. You hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Denise finally looked up, and for the first time, there seemed to be genuine regret in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to go like that. Jane's response was cold. Then you should have thought about that before you opened your mouth. The backstage area was buzzing with activity. Production assistants rushed around. Phones pressed to their ears. The show's producers were huddled in an urgent conversation. Everyone seemed to be talking about what had just transpired, their voices low but urgent. One of the senior producers approached the panelists as they left the set. His expression was grave. We need to have a meeting, all of us, right now. The women followed him to a conference room, the atmosphere tense and heavy. Once inside, the producer closed the door and turned to face them, as his face etched with concern and anger. What on earth happened out there? He demanded, looking directly at Denise. We've already had dozens of calls from viewers complaining. Social media is exploding, and Brenda's agent has been on the phone, and believe me, they are not happy. Denise slumped in her chair, her earlier defensiveness finally crumbling completely. I thought I was making good television. I thought people wanted to see real, challenging conversations. The producer's voice rose. Challenging conversations, yes. Character assassination of beloved actresses, absolutely not. Do you have any idea what kind of damage control we're going to have to do? What this could mean for the show's reputation? Kay Adams spoke up quietly. We tried to intervene. We all did. But once Denise started, she wouldn't stop. Nadia nodded in agreement. We called her out on air, multiple times. We defended Brenda. We did everything we could short of physically removing Denise from the set. The producer sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. I know, and that's the only reason this isn't an even bigger disaster than it already is. The three of you handled it as well as anyone could under the circumstances. He turned back to Denise, his expression hardening. But you, Denise, what you did today was beyond unprofessional. It was cruel. It was uncalled for. And it has potentially damaged relationships we've spent years building with talent and their representatives. Denise's voice was small now, all her earlier bravado gone. I'm sorry. I really am. I got carried away. Jane Moore shook her head. Getting carried away is one thing. What you did was sustained and deliberate. You had multiple opportunities to back down, to change course, and you didn't take any of them. The meeting continued for another hour, with the producers outlining the steps they would need to take to address the fallout. Statements would need to be prepared, apologies issued, conversations had with network executives, the whole ugly business of trying to salvage what could be salvaged from the wreckage of the day's broadcast. Through it all, the image of Brenda Blethyn walking off that set with her head held high remained vivid in everyone's minds. The way she had maintained her composure. The way she had refused to be dragged down to the level of the attacks against her. The way she had simply chosen to remove herself from a toxic situation rather than engage with it further. It was a masterclass in grace under pressure, and it stood in stark contrast to the behavior that had driven her away. Meanwhile, in her dressing room, Brenda sat quietly with her assistant, processing what had just occurred. Her hands, which had been shaking when she first arrived, were now steady as she removed her stage makeup. Her assistant hovered nearby, clearly wanting to say something comforting, but unsure how to begin. "Are you all right?" the assistant finally asked, her voice gentle and concerned. Brenda looked at her reflection in the mirror, seeing not just herself, but the weight of decades in this industry. "I've faced difficult interviews before. Journalists who didn't understand my work, critics who were harsh, but what just happened out there, that was something else entirely. That was personal." Her assistant nodded sympathetically. "It was completely out of line. Everyone in the studio was shocked. The crew, the audience, everyone. You handled it perfectly." Brenda gave a small, sad smile. "I'm not sure there is a perfect way to handle being attacked on live television. You either fight back and look defensive, or you leave and people might think you're running away. But staying there, letting her continue to demean me and my work, that wasn't an option I could live with." Back in the conference room, the meeting was wrapping up, though the tension had not dissipated. The producer looked around the table at the four women, his expression weary. "We'll be releasing a statement tonight. Denise, you'll need to prepare your own apology. It needs to be genuine, heartfelt, and it needs to acknowledge the specific nature of what you said." Denise nodded mutely, looking smaller somehow than she had at the start of the day. "I'll write something. I'll make it right." Kay Adams stood up, ready to leave. "I hope you understand, Denise, that this isn't just about the statement. This is about rebuilding trust, not just with Brenda, but with every guest who comes on this show. They need to know they'll be treated with respect." Nadia gathered her belongings as well. "And with the viewers, they tune in for conversation, for debate, yes, but not for blood sport. Not to watch someone they admire being torn down for entertainment." Jane Moore was the last to stand, pausing at the door to look back at Denise. "You know what the worst part is? Brenda would have been a wonderful interview. She's intelligent, thoughtful, funny. She has incredible stories to tell. But instead of letting her share any of that, you turned it into an interrogation. You wasted an opportunity, and you hurt someone in the process." As the three women left, Denise remained seated, alone with the producer. He sat down across from her, his earlier anger giving way to something that looked almost like pity. "What happened today, Denise? What was really going on?" Denise's eyes filled with tears, the first real emotion beyond defensiveness that she'd shown since the disaster began. "I don't know. I saw her sitting there, so calm, so collected, so sure of herself. And something in me I wanted to shake that certainty. I wanted to see if I could get under her skin. And once I started, I couldn't seem to stop." The producer shook his head slowly. "That's not what we do here, Denise. That's not who we are. Our job is to create a space where people feel comfortable opening up, where conversations can happen naturally. What you did today destroyed that space, not just for Brenda, but potentially for every future guest who might now think twice about coming on the show." Denise wiped at her eyes roughly. I know that now. In the moment, it felt like I was being brave, asking the questions no one else would ask." "There's a difference between brave and cruel," the producer said quietly. "And what you were today was cruel." The social media response was swift and brutal. Within hours, clips from the show were circulating everywhere, with commentary that was almost universally in support of Brenda and condemning of Denise. Hashtags supporting Brenda began trending, while Denise found herself at the center of a firestorm of criticism. In living rooms across the country, viewers who had watched the show live were still talking about it, replaying the moments in their minds, discussing it with friends and family. The consensus was clear. Brenda Blethyn had been treated abominably, and her decision to walk off the set had been not only justified, but necessary.